The Handkerchief by Great 78. Chapter 7. Quidditch Woes, Slytherin's Foes, and More Questions Than You Can Swing a Dead Cat At. Like many of his interactions involving his two least favorite Gryffindors, Potter and the Weasel, Draco began it feeling on top of the world, and ended it feeling miserable. This was particularly true if Hermione was also involved in the interaction. His first Slytherin team Quidditch practice had been no different. They had taken to the pitch just after breakfast on Saturday morning, Nimbus 2001s in hand. Marcus Flint, the Slytherin captain, had been awestruck when the trunk containing the brooms had been delivered the day before. Draco had already been named the new seeker for the team, and he hoped that it was entirely on his own merits. But he also knew that Lucius had written to Flint in the first week of school, explaining that, as an alum and a former Slytherin seeker, Lucius would be honored if Flint would accept the gift of new brooms for the team, and so on. They were the envy of everyone watching, and Draco was bursting with pride, knowing that he was responsible for the spectacle they were putting on. Never mind that his father had bought the brooms, likely intending them as a bribe. It was he who had fought for and won the Seeker's kit, his name stitched above the number 07 on the back of the green and silver jersey. No matter what else was said or thought, he had earned this. Shoving aside the Gryffindors from their practice was the icing on the cake. Oliver Wood, the Gryffindor captain, was practically apoplectic with rage. The Weasley twins were highly annoyed, and Potter looked outraged as well. Draco was beside himself in glee. Then Hermione and the Weasel joined the two teams as they squared off in the center of the pitch, and things went downhill quickly, as they often seemed to nowadays when Draco was around her and her two Gryffindor mates together. "What's happening? Why aren't you playing? And what's he doing here?" Weasley demanded of the Gryffindors, glaring in Draco's direction. "I'm the new Slytherin seeker, Weasley. Everyone's just been admiring the brooms my father bought our team." Despite knowing how that sounded, Draco couldn't help it. Flaunting his family's wealth in the Weasel's annoying freckled face would never get old, especially after the incident this summer in the bookshop. He now knew for himself that what his father had always said before was true. The Weasleys really did have too many children and too little money. Hermione's eyes narrowed at him, but he had an audience now. "Good, aren't they? But perhaps the Gryffindor team will be able to raise some gold and get new brooms, too. You could raffle off those clean sweep 5s. I expect a museum would bid for them." Draco laughed. The twin Weasleys grew incensed, but their defense came not from someone on the team, but from the last person he'd hoped would offer it. "At least, no one on the Gryffindor team had to buy their way in. They got in on pure talent," Hermione said acidly. His gaze turned quickly to hers, silver meeting copper. How could she? Draco had worked hard to earn this spot. It was his father's taunting all over again. Did no one believe in him and his abilities? Draco's teammates roared with laughter and exchanged knowing looks. The self-loathing and uncertainty that he usually associated with interactions with his father roared back, flooding into his mind. "No one asked your opinion, you filthy little mudblood," he spat out, the words tumbling out past his lips faster than his logical brain could filter them. He snapped his mouth shut, but it was already out there. It was the first time he had ever said that word. He had lashed out, wanting to make her hurt as much as he did. In an instant, he knew he had made a very bad mistake. She inhaled sharply, a look of confusion and hurt on her face. The disappointment in her eyes far outstripped the outrage and shouts of the other Gryffindors, and Draco nearly apologized to her right then and there. Then the weasel's spell-taped wand was pointing at him, whatever spell he'd intended rebounding and hitting the weasel instead. Weasley fell onto the soft grassy mud of the Quidditch pitch, clutching his cheeks as slimy green slugs began pelting the ground from his mouth. Draco and the rest of the Slytherin Quidditch team could do nothing but laugh and point as the slimy creatures poured from the Prat's mouth. That was until Hermione dropped to Weasley's side and reached into the cuff of her jumper, withdrawing a familiar square of white fabric. She dabbed at Ron's mouth as he panted between waves of slugs, trying to wipe off most of the slime. Draco's belly laughs fell away as he recognized it, a small bit of a green-stitched D just visible on it. She looked up at him, and their eyes met once more, her copper ones filled with unshed tears. "How could you?" she seemed to ask him. His own silver eyes carried a look of shock, of shame, of hurt. He knew he had no right to be hurt, but she was using the handkerchief he had given her to clean up the mess that Weasley had brought upon himself, the embarrassment that Weasley had intended for Draco. And yet, no amount of hurt he felt could probably compare to what she felt. He knew deep down. He dropped his gaze, ashamed. He had thought of that word as disgusting when his father used it, but given an opening to cut someone down, he had taken it. It made it far worse that the someone had been Hermione Granger. Draco's newfound apparent fixation on blood supremacy seemed to impress the upperclassmen of Slytherin House. Suddenly he was invited to sit in the choice chairs in the common room, to offer commentary when Marcus or Adrian or Thaddeus were discussing politics or Quidditch. He seemed to have followers now, and not just Crabbe and Goyle. But for weeks Draco obsessed that his fellow Slytherin teammates might more clearly recall those moments on the Quidditch pitch. Not just the amusing incident of the weasel vomiting up great big slimy slugs, but of Draco's reaction of slack-jawed shock at his own use of the word mudblood, and of the looks he'd exchanged with Hermione before she left with the two twits. There was nothing for it. He needed to stop associating with her. He resolved once again to ignore her, to best her in class, to put this, friendship, acquaintanceship he'd had with her behind him. His side had been chosen for him the moment that the sorting hat had touched his blonde head, and she was a Gryffindor, a muggle-born. Nothing about her was for him. Draco found ways to subtly put down Hermione when talking with other Slytherins, either in class or in the common room. He and the others would occasionally make fun of her swottiness in class, pretending to raise their hands like her and point at her when the professors' backs were turned. He would agree and laugh with Pansy and the rest of the Slytherin girls about Hermione's bushy hair. He started to use the abhorrent term more often, noticing how his esteem among his Slytherin housemates increased the more he used it. Each time he said it, it rolled off his tongue more easily, but a part of him still felt a pang of regret at it, something he worked hard to ignore. It was becoming a bit easier each day, being a pureblood ass. At least, that's what he told himself. Did this witch even celebrate Halloween? It was the second year's second Halloween within Hogwarts, and once again Hermione was missing. This time the Wonder Boy who wouldn't die and the Weasel were gone as well, which was no surprise. The three of them were usually together nowadays, Draco had noticed, with a bit more than mild annoyance. The Halloween feast was excellent, as all Hogwarts feasts were. Many of the older students had already left for the common rooms, getting a head start on the late-night Halloween parties, which was still to come. The younger students, mostly first and second years, being supervised by some of the prefects, were buzzing with excitement as the feast ended, crowding into the entrance hall. Half of them made their way upstairs to Gryffindor and Ravenclaw towers, the other half moving towards the cellars and dungeons. A great ruckus upstairs drew everyone's attention, and most of the Hufflepuffs and Slytherins turned back, hurrying up the stairs to investigate. A crowd was gathering on the second floor, and Draco could see some sort of red writing on a wall ahead. He pushed through the crowd, emerging in the clearing. The wall read, "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the heir, beware." "Enemies of the heir, beware! You'll be next, mudbloods!" Draco sneered, looking around. He realized suddenly that none of the older crowd of Slytherins that he was usually trying to impress with those words were here. Instead, he was surrounded by a lot of young and scared schoolmates from other houses. And Hermione. He flushed quite heavily in embarrassment, especially now that he saw a dead cat hanging near the words. The sight of it made his stomach roll, and suddenly the rich Halloween feast seemed like a bit of a mistake. Several professors, the caretaker, Argus Filch, and Professor Dumbledore bustled up, taking the cat down and making their way to Gilderoy Lockhart's classroom. Potter, Weasley, and Hermione were told to come as well, as they'd apparently been the first ones to find the cat and the words. Draco and the rest of the Slytherins, along with a crowd of Hufflepuffs, moved back down the staircase towards their common rooms. Everyone was talking and whispering furtively, some eyeing Draco, likely bothered by what he'd said earlier in the corridor. The Slytherin common room party was in full swing, with the younger students sharing the gossip of what had happened with the older students. But Draco wasn't feeling up to it anymore. He went to lie down on his bed, drawing the curtains shut. What exactly was this Chamber of Secrets business? And who was the heir? Who were its enemies? It seemed unlikely that this was just a bit of Halloween fun. A cat had been killed for Salazar's sake. True, it was only Mrs. Norris, whom nobody liked, but all the same, it seemed to be far from the scope of a typical Halloween prank. After a couple of hours, Draco gave up going to sleep as a bad job, and made his way out of the common room, stepping carefully around the litter of butterbeer and fire whiskey bottles, avoiding the snogging couples in the corners and on couches. He made his way to Professor Snape's office and knocked on the door. "Enter." Draco stepped in and closed the door behind him. "What can I do for you at this late hour, Mr. Malfoy? Tired of your after-party already?" Snape looked tired, but then again, he always looked sunken-eyed and unshowered, so tonight was not really much different. "I wanted to ask about what happened tonight." Draco settled himself in a chair opposite Snape's desk. "If you're worried about the cat, Mr. Malfoy, she will be fine. She was not dead, only petrified." Snape smiled waspishly. "No, Professor, I just wanted to ask, who is this heir, and what is this Chamber of Secrets?" Snape sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. "There is a legend that when Hogwarts was built, Salazar Slytherin, without the knowledge of the other 3 Hogwarts founders, built a secret chamber within the castle. The chamber was said to contain a creature that could be called upon to protect the castle's young inhabitants against enemies. If you will recall, Slytherin lived many years before the Statute of Secrecy. His enemies were muggles, naturally, and he felt that muggle-borns, when challenged to decide between the magical world and the mundane one, would ally themselves with the muggles. It is why he did not wish to teach muggle-borns at Hogwarts. He was afraid that muggles might come with torches and pitchforks and kill the young witches and wizards here at the school. So I was right. The mudbloods are in danger?" Draco asked quickly. "Do not use that word!" Snape snipped his words out at Draco, glaring at him. "I'm sorry, Professor. Are the muggle-borns in danger?" Professor Snape eyed him curiously. For not the first time, Draco was nervous around his favorite professor. He consoled himself that at least Snape did not know that he was thinking specifically about Hermione Granger when he asked the question. "I'm afraid I cannot say for certain. This creature, this beast, if it is indeed real, then it has been sealed away for centuries. I do not know who has opened it, but apparently it can only be opened by a descendant of Salazar Slytherin himself." This Gilderoy Lockhart fellow really was a foul, loathsome git. None of his defense against the dark arts classes had been especially useful to anyone, and now that Draco realized that some people within the school might actually need a real defense against the dark forces, it seemed especially stupid that he was their sodding teacher. This knowledge was made far, far worse by the fact that nearly every witch in the entire school, including apparently Hermione, seemed to have a crush on him. Draco eyed the curly-haired ass critically as he stood in front of the class, reading from yet another ridiculous passage from one of his moronic books. Today, as had happened for several classes before, Potter had joined him to act out various parts within the script. Draco's attention wandered, his eyes falling, as they often did, on Hermione. She was watching with rapt attention, sometimes mouthing the words along with Professor Lockhart, as though she had memorized whole passages. Draco was unsurprised to realize that she probably had. He looked back up at the twiddling Pratt. What was so sodding great about him? His blonde hair, his eyes, his ridiculous teeth. How could one mouth hold all those teeth, anyway? And blonde hair, well, that was just hair, Draco thought. His hair was much nicer looking than Lockhart's. True, Lockhart was grown and had muscles. So what? Draco would have muscles one day. What did all of these witches see in him? Draco narrowed his eyes at the bushy-haired girl near the front of the room. What did she see in him? Slytherin house members, like all of the other Hogwarts houses, spoke of nothing in their free time except the Chamber of Secrets these days. Hoping to curry favour with those wondering who had opened it, Draco wrote to Lucius and Narcissa separately, asking if they knew anything about it. His mother answered negatively, saying that it sounded like some sort of silly fairy tale to her, and not to let it bother his mind. Lucius, however, sent a more cryptic answer, saying not to worry about it just yet, and stay out of the way of whomever it was that was doing it. He talked as though he knew something about it, and yet refused to tell Draco anything. This was no real surprise to Draco. There was power in knowledge, Lucius believed. His father was always certain to keep what he knew to himself. Draco's first Quidditch match as the new Slytherin Seeker would go down in popular Slytherin lore for many years to come. Unfortunately, it was for all of the wrong reasons. The rain didn't bother him. Growing up in Britain, rain was expected. If you waited for good weather to play Quidditch, you'd be waiting a while. And he felt well matched against Potter. His broom was of course superior, a direct improvement from last year's Nimbus 2000. And whilst the Scarhead might be a natural flyer, Draco had years of practice and experience on his side. And yet Potter had been acting weird all during the course of the match. Granted, there seemed to be something wrong with one of the bludgers, almost as though it was following Potter around the pitch, but Scarhead's antics and trying to avoid it were admittedly hilarious. At times, Draco would look over and he was hanging upside down, zigzagging back and forth across the pitch. The Gryffindor captain called for a time-out. Draco gathered with the rest of the Slytherins, and Marcus Flint told him to keep his eyes open. Clearly, Potter was busy trying to keep away from that crazy bludger that seemed to have it out for him, so it should be quite easy to find the golden snitch, whilst Potter was distracted. When play resumed, Potter's flying went from erratic to downright silly. At one point, he seemed to do a funny little pirouette, spinning like a tornado in midair. "Training for the ballet, Potter?" Draco laughed. Potter looked at him with loathing. Just then, Draco spotted the bludger coming in fast on Potter's flank. His eyes widened, but before he could make even a bit of noise, the bludger had slammed with all of its might into Potter. Honestly, it was a bit surprising that he hadn't been knocked off his broom. Draco heard a sickening crunching noise that he wasn't sure he wanted to identify. Then, like a madman, Potter was racing towards him. Draco swerved, thinking that Gryffindor had gone mental. But it turned out that the snitch had been hovering right over him the entire time. The match was over, and Potter had somehow managed a miraculous catch with one broken arm, for fuck's sake. The Slytherins had lost, and it was entirely Draco's fault, something that Marcus Flint had remarked upon multiple times at the pitch, and in the days after, with increasingly loud volume. He took a lot of razzing and hate over the next few days at losing the match. He blamed Potter, bad-mouthing him to the other Slytherins, but privately he knew that it was entirely his fault. The Gryffindors seemed determined to remind Slytherin House of their lead in the Quidditch Cup race, and in house points, to rub their noses in it at every turn. One potions class, a firework was tossed into Greg Goyle's cauldron, resulting in swelling solution spraying across the students, mainly the Slytherin students. As Draco made his way up to Snape's desk for the antidote, his nose literally bigger than his own head, he saw that the majority of the Gryffindors were unaffected. Hermione looked especially smug about the entire thing. Draco almost suspected her of tossing the firework, but had no proof. An image of the potions professor's robes being set on fire sprang to mind. If she had not been the one to toss the firework, she certainly knew who had, judging by the look on her face. He thought once again that this muggle-born witch could have easily been sorted into Slytherin House. When the announcements to sign up for Dueling Club were posted, Draco was rather excited. He had never duelled, for real, and though he had challenged Potter to a duel last year, he knew that his skills were rough at best, This would be a change to learn from professionals. Rumours had been going around that Flitwick had won several dueling competitions, so Draco assumed he'd be teaching it. Therefore, it was particularly disappointing to find Professor Git Lockhart there to teach the lesson instead. The students were paired off, and somehow, in a rare bit of poetic justice, he supposed, he and Potter were to square off against each other. Potter's tickling jinx had brought him to his knees, and he barely had the voice to force out his own jinx. "Tarantulegra!" Draco looked up through the tears of laughter streaming from his eyes to see Potter dancing like a maniac. If possible, he laughed even harder. The rest of the duels had gone no better. Most of the students were lying on the ground, with the notable exception of Hermione with Millie, in which the latter had the bushy-haired witch in a headlock. Draco watched in amazement once Snape had lifted the tickling jinx. Millie was easily twice the size of Hermione, and yet Hermione continued to fight back fiercely. Snape and Lockhart selected Draco and Potter for a demonstration duel, and Draco privately thought that this was a bad idea. They bowed to each other slightly and stepped several paces apart. Snape whispered something in his ear, and without thinking, Draco repeated the incantation. "Serpensortia!" A giant black snake sprang from the tip of his wand, landing heavily on the floor and hissing angrily. Draco, along with everyone else in the hall, stepped back quickly. Despite being a member of Slytherin House, Draco was no fan of snakes. Well, almost everyone else stepped back. Lockhart tried to vanish the snake, but only succeeded in riling it up more, throwing it up into the air and banging it back onto the ground. Now the snake appeared to find a target. Justin Finch Fletchley, who sat at the edge of the crowd. And to everyone's surprise, Potter began moving forward. He hissed and spat at the snake, which miraculously seemed to understand him. The snake coiled, head up and alert, but did not move towards Justin again. Draco stood slack-jawed, all pretense of a duel forgotten. Potter was a Parselmouth. That night, alone in his drape-drawn bed, Draco turned the incident over and over again in his mind. A Parselmouth. Someone who could speak to and understand snakes. The House of Slytherin's symbol was a snake. Could Harry Potter, the chosen one, actually be the heir of Slytherin? And Hermione had chosen him as her friend? She was possibly in greater danger than Draco had realized. It took him hours to fall into a fitful sleep, and his dreams were filled with snakes and dead cats with copper-colored eyes. Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Handkerchief by Great78.